This is a Dauntless Media Collective podcast. Visit dauntless.fm for more content.
Hi, I'm Nate.
I'm Gail.
And this is Full Mutuality. So today, I'm really excited about our guest. I've been listening to his podcast for a little while now, and I'm thrilled to be able to have Scott Okamoto, who is a former English professor and also a podcaster and soon-to-be author with a book on the way. And I guess, Scott, first of all, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on Full Mutuality.
Thank you for joining us.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I guess to start off, first of all, you're a soon-to-be author. Your book is coming out. Do you have a title for it yet? What's it about? Are there things you can talk about or can't talk about?
Oh, yeah, I can talk about it all. The book is tentatively titled The Wrong Christian because it's about my time working at Azusa Pacific University, which is an evangelical liberal arts college here in California. And when they hired me, I was still a Christian, like a progressive one, and already didn't feel like I fit in. So within like 5 or 6 years, I had completely deconstructed my faith. And the whole time they were promoting me, and I was a full-timer. So I stuck around for another 10 years teaching that brand of progressive Christianity, but really secretly not having any faith of my own at all. But, you know, when you're raised, I grew up evangelical, so I spoke evangelical fluently.
Yeah.
I knew I knew how to say all the things, and then sort of twist that into a progressive mindset where you like care about people and you aren't a racist. You don't hate LGBTQ people. You value women. These are all things that got me in a lot of trouble. I know.
In evangelicalism, it's like, ooh, this is how we're so liberal. Look at our extremism.
But yeah. It's embarrassing to point out, but in that context, I was seen as a really radical, dangerous person, and I was constantly being told on, reported to the president of the school.
Is APU a very conservative Christian university? I guess we're East Coasters, you're a West Coaster, so I'm less familiar with what's out there.
So if you ask an evangelical, they would say that's the liberal evangelical school because they allow dancing, and if you're 21, you're allowed to drink off campus. So that puts them on like the far left of the evangelical spectrum. Yeah. But once you step out of that world, there's nothing liberal or progressive about it. Right. You know, it's super conservative. It's so it's
I find that
I was just the wrong person.
yeah, you really were. I find that so fascinating coming from, you know, my world, and I've talked about it before on the podcast, so I won't belabor the point. But to let you in on it, Scott, I come from Bob Jones University.
I heard that blew my mind.
He comes from like the really conservative evangelical university.
So we're on the opposite.
They're not even
end of
considered evangelicals to some of those people. They're fundamentalists.
Yeah. We're not even saved.
Yeah, You folks aren't even Christians.
No.
I don't know what you're talking about.
No, exactly.
Which it's funny because you know, you can always get a little bit more extreme because from
a lot.
Or a lot, yeah. Because from Bob Jones University, you then can stumble into the Pensacola Christian College world, where you know they're still kind of similar to Bob Jones in that they like to look like nice to the outside world, but you know they've got the additional KJV only, you know, stipulation in their school. And then further beyond that, you have places like Hyles-Anderson College, which is a whole other level of extremism.
So what we're saying is that evangelicalism is a spectrum disorder. Is that what we're going with? How far on the spectrum?
It's kind of an infinite spectrum, it sounds like. It's just people just pushing further and further out there.
Yeah. Because then you've got Westboro Baptist, which is, you know, a whole other But
yeah, they come out here. They protested many things I've been to.
Oh, God. So, I want to. I'm kind of curious about your time at Azusa Pacific. Maybe if you want to kind of tell us some stories. What was probably something that stands out to you as being, among the more ridiculous things about that particular evangelical university, or even evangelical universities in general, as I think, your podcast is likely going to be talking to people from other evangelical schools.
Definitely. So the podcast is the stories of mostly former students that I had in my class that were still friends all these years later. This would have been like from the early 2000s to, I quit in 2013. I was going to be fired. So I can tell that story.
Yeah.
But, once I announced that I was doing this podcast on Twitter with some friends, people just immediately started reaching out to me who went to like Liberty and, Wheaton and Biola, which is sort of like the rival school of APU out here. And, everyone just had ridiculous, crazy stories to tell that don't sound ridiculous when you're in it. When you're living through, like you went to Bob Jones, I'm sure like at any given day you saw and heard things that today sound ridiculous. Like what the hell? But at the time, that's just normal. So all these stories of just rampant racism and sexism and homophobia and just bizarre theology in the evangelical world that really isn't biblical so much as cultural. Yeah. So that's what I encountered. I went to public schools my whole life. I went to public elementary, junior high, high school, and then UC San Diego, it's a huge secular institution, science-based. I was an English major, but I failed out of science. And that, I don't know, that was a huge part of my own deconstruction, even though I was a hardcore evangelical Christian through most of that. So by the time I got to APU, I was already had a foot out the door of all church. I was really searching and struggling. My wife and I were in the same boat. We were trying to go to this church I grew up at called Lake Avenue Church here in Pasadena. Okay. I grew up there, and my parents were still going there, and they were having all these new young multicultural, programs and Sunday school classes, and even a cool hip service. It was sort of like a proto mega church thing, because this would have been like the late 90s. So, a band and a stage and, lights and a really cool pastor with great sneakers. This was like just beginning to hit. And so I was already we were already sick of that scene. And so when I got hired at APU, I was already like, man, I'm just going to teach here a couple of semesters and then hopefully hook on to I was also teaching at community colleges. So I was teaching normal school. And really enjoying it and really enjoying the interaction with students, feeling like it was like a real interaction where people because I was teaching composition, you're teaching people how to think. You're teaching people how to communicate and use the English language to their advantage. And most of these students were, lower income. It was very diverse. Contrast that with APU, which when I got there in 98, was about 85 to 88%. I think it was 88% white, the student population. Oh, wow. And this is Southern California.
That should
you can't
not be.
Find a place outside of your local country club that was 88% of anything, much less white, in Southern California. And here was this little sort of stronghold of, white nationalism in the LA area that was, it was APU. So I immediately felt weird because I was just starting to really get in touch with my Asian American identity and really starting to question, I was often that token BIPOC person in a room of white people. And I was comfortable doing that because I did that my whole life. I grew up in Arcadia, California, and for you East Coasters, it was a white supremacist stronghold in the San Gabriel Valley of Los Angeles area. Like literally, you talk about redlining it. It was solid red.
Wow.
And for some reason, my parents moved there in 1977 because we weren't black or brown. They didn't know what we were, and we kind of broke the line.
Wow.
But at the time I grew up, it was all white. And if you know anything about Arcadia now, it's now solidly Taiwanese. It's the mall I grew up walking at, where I got ching-chonged and told go back to your country, is now like the Asian mall, which is kind of awesome.
Ironic in a very good way.
Yeah. All the white people moved like east, farther out. So when I got to APU, it was just like, man, I'm back to this. This is, and it's not that anyone was mean or even unwelcoming. It was more that it was just crystal clear that I was an outsider, or I was just not white. And most of the BIPOC faculty had to learn sort of how to do the song and dance of being, we're the good ones, we're the good Black people, we're the good Asian people, we're the good Hispanic people. And you really have to cater and go out of your way to cater to whiteness in these spaces. And I was already uncomfortable with that. Yeah. But I don't know if you said you listened to the Dan Hodge interview on my podcast. Both of us started around the same time, and we were ready to play nice. We were ready to do it, and whatever it took to have stable employment. But quickly realized that you kind of have to sell your soul, and neither of us were willing to do that. So we just became troublemakers. And so I was constantly hauled into my boss's office to account for something horrible I said.
Can you tell us
which
some of the
ranged
stories
from
of what you got in trouble for?
Sure.
We like hearing those.
Yeah.
Stories.
One of my most popular, so when you teach composition, it kind of sucks because most people in America don't know English. At all.
Right.
They couldn't tell you what a noun or a verb is, when they come out of high school. And the APU students were no different. So just to teach us what a sentence is, I had to teach parts of speech. What's a noun? What's a verb? What's an adjective? All these pronouns. At community college, it just so happened that one kid said, "Can I say the F word on your show?"
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Oh, okay. You got the explicit tag.
Yes, we do for every episode.
So this one kid just was trying to shock me one day at community college, and he was like, "Well, fucking this and fuck that," and I started writing his sentences on the chalkboard with all the ways he used fucking, and so this is a noun, this is a verb, this is an adjective.
Brilliant.
And the students were like suddenly wide-eyed. They were like, "Oh,
it worked."
I never understood what an adjective was until I saw, that's fucking shit. Shit is a noun. Fucking is modifying it, so it's an adjective. So stupidly, I brought this to APU.
Oh man!
Thinking that knowing that it kind of turned the light bulb on for community college students,
right?
And some kids appreciate it, but oh my god. The day after I did that lesson, my boss was standing outside his door, just cracking up. He's like, "What did you?" The school got calls from parents and some of the students themselves. Professor Okamoto wrote the F word all over the place and was just spewing filth. And so I had to explain to him. I was like, "This is my pedagogy. This is how I use sort of subversive tactics to help these kids understand how the English language works." And he thought it was awesome, but he's like, "Yeah, but you can't do that here." I was like, "Oh, well, shit."
Fucking shit. It's not just any
fucking shit. I actually had I talked about the etymology of the word shit and got in trouble too. So like I couldn't even. It's one thing to say you can't use the word, but we couldn't even talk about it. So I realized, this is not a progressive place. I was in a faculty meeting and a woman sat down next to me, just flustered, just really upset. And so we were all like, well, what's wrong? And she's like, a student said crap in class today. And like half the people at the table were like, oh, and the other half, my half, we were looking like, and
okay, and
and your world exploded and shattered.
Yeah. So we had to go, oh no, I'm so sorry. That's terrible. And she was scandalized. It's like,
oh God.
So that's the cultural vibe. I mean, you can't talk about, and then, so that's the word. You can't even talk about words, but you couldn't. I was told not to talk about marijuana. I was because I tried to teach argumentation and thinking about different sides of issues. So I brought in fun issues that I thought were fun. And most of the students were okay with this. It was always just like in a class of 15, a third of them would just be horribly upset and cause trouble.
And inevitably, at least one or two of them were a child or grandchild of, some big donor who had like a building named after them or something, right?
Yeah. A lot of pastors' kids.
True.
I knew if there was a kid of like a famous sports person or something, that they were going to cause trouble because rich people tend to be really conservative. Although I have to say the missionary kids were usually the most rebellious. So there was that. I
probably didn't want to rat you out. The missionary kids.
No, the missionary kids were like, "Tell me more." I fucking hate my life.
That's usually the case. I find that so fascinating because, from the perspective of somebody who went to a school like Bob Jones, APU would be seen as like non-Christian. Like Christian in name only. And so, to have this sort of experience, because I remember on, I think one of the episode, with, a former administrator on your podcast, he was talking about one of the struggles that he dealt with was that there were no policies, so he was doing things that got approval, from the provost and the president and whoever. And then suddenly a donor got upset or an alumnus got upset.
Or someone from another school.
Right. Someone from another school. Right.
Told on him.
Yeah. And so there's no, but there's no policy. So there's no standard. Right. And I find it interesting that, the APU is trying to, skate along that line. Whereas where I come from, you better believe there were policies. Like the word crap, that was off limits. And we had meetings in the dorms. I remember every semester we had at the start of the semester, the dorm meeting to talk about what kind of language we are and are not allowed to use. And it was the only time all semester that certain words were ever allowed to be spoken, including words like crap. And even saying phrases like, oh my gosh, or darn it, or what the heck. They were all explicitly off limits. Like they were in our handbook as being off limits. So it's just, it's funny. So on the one hand, those struggles didn't exist because, they were just,
the line was clear.
Yeah, the line was clear. So, but on the other hand, then you had people like me who just couldn't give a shit about the line.
Until you want to graduate and you've gotten called into the discipline committee too many times, so now you got to be good for a little bit and not get in any trouble.
Nate, did you say heck yesterday? I've heard stories.
It's wild though, like fundamentalism, as wacky as it is. I do have respect for the fact that they let you know where all the lines are, and they're sort of unabashed about the fact, we're homophobic. We don't, we believe gays are, and they'll tell you, and then they'll do the same with women, and they're just not shy to tell you all of their horrible opinions, and they don't try and couch it, and they don't try and sugarcoat it, and it's like they're really proud of it. And then you get into like evangelicalism, where it's like all the policies that are not there, where the lines are not. Everything is like behind the scenes, behind a whole bunch of layers of curtains. So on the outside, you might not know that that's a line, but then secretly it is. So I just find it sounds like a lot more of a hard space. I found it was a difficult space to navigate because it was full of contradictions. But it sounds like even as a teacher in that school, you know, here you have the person calling you into his office laughing and thinking it's no big deal, but still letting you know, well, we still have to appease the donors and you can't do it anymore. And it's like
the paying customers, the parents.
Of course. Because,
and that's how APU is very evangelical in that you follow the money.
Mm-hmm. So
instead of policies where you had, Nate, we have just don't piss off the people giving us money.
Right.
And that's very, vague, just like evangelical theology is vague.
Yeah.
These kids come to APU absolutely confident in their views that sex before marriage is forbidden in the Bible. And then when you tell them to go look for that, they get a little upset because there actually isn't a verse that, says do not have sex before you get married after you've been dating for this many years. There's no clear cut. So even just the basic belief system that most evangelicals have is not really biblically based. It's biblically inferred.
Yeah.
It's biblically there's these purity verses and in some cases not. These people don't really read the Bible. They read a few verses that they're very familiar with, that they wield like a sword.
But even concepts
every year I asked, do you guys even know what the 10 Commandments are? And they would say, sure. And I swear, only in 15 years, I think 1 or 2 students could name off all the 10 Commandments. You would think something so... It's kind of a trick question because there's a couple of different places where they might exist, and there's more than 10.
Yeah.
Even though we call it the 10. But they don't know that. They don't kill, don't steal, don't screw your neighbor. Something something about Sunday that we don't follow. And it just falls apart. But they think that's the basis of their faith, and they think that's the basis of their whole understanding of how the world works. And they don't even know it. Yeah.
It's so fascinating how little evangelicals actually know about their own beliefs and their own and I guess I hate to give fundamentalists any credit, but where I suppose I could is that they really do hammer home all of like I had to memorize the 10 Commandments when I was, I think, in like 3rd or 4th grade. When I was I think it was my senior year of high school or maybe my junior year of high school, I memorized the entire book of Philippians.
Cool.
Plus the
Nate's flexing on us right now.
He is. He's showing us how fundamentalist those roots go down.
I bow before you. I never memorized anything.
But it wasn't by choice. Actually, I joined in order to get out of Bible class when I was in high school, I joined the Bible quiz team. And
quiz team, he's still
rote memorization came easy for me. So
Gail's heart is just pounding right now.
The other day, for fun.
That's my man.
I came up with how evangelical were you quiz. And I don't have it on hand, but I just started adding things like, could you sing 3 VeggieTales songs off by heart? And just random stuff that's so uniquely evangelical, and seeing which of us was a bigger nerd in that time. But it's funny when you were mentioning how they don't know their own stuff and they just cherry pick a verse. I had somebody on our page saying because somebody commented that they don't believe Jesus is coming back, and they're like, really? You can be a Christian and not believe Jesus is coming back? And to them, it was just so crystal clear that the doctrine of the rapture is biblical, and it is like everyone believes in it. It's like, no, this is an American evangelical doctrine that's been around for 200 years max. It was 18 something that someone proposed this. And, they'll take verses about Jesus talking, about his resurrection, and that's he's coming back in the future, and just all the different things that in their head, it's, they've really just been watching Left Behind movies, and they have music and all this stuff reinforcing this, this concept that's brand new to Christianity. And it's it's amazing, how, like you said, they don't actually know their own history and Yeah, it is quite interesting to see what's been dragged in and is viewed as like, obviously this is part of Christianity. And it's like, really though? Like, do you not know how new this is as a teaching?
Yeah.
I'm going to jump around in questions, but I had this on my head as you were bringing your own story into it. You talked about how you had one foot out the door when you came into APU, you were still technically a Christian, but struggling. You had a lot of stuff going on in your mind. I was wondering if you'd share some of the journey of, did APU push you over that edge? How did that happen? What did that, I mean, the mega church world that you were in was clearly hitting some things in you that was really having an effect. What did that process look like for you going into APU, and how did your faith, what did that faith transition deconstruction process look like for you?
Yeah, I had a long deconstruction when I look back, beginning when I was a kid and asking questions. And this is really half of what my book is about. Is each chapter I kind of go back and look at a seminal moment of my youth or early adulthood and sort of tie it in with what I was seeing at APU. I think it started at UC San Diego when I was convinced being gay was a sin or an abomination and all that stuff. It's embarrassing. Mm-hmm. But when I actually met gay people who, I grew up 7 houses down from James Dobson.
Wow.
And so my parents were huge Dobson people. He was in my house. We babysat for him.
Wow.
And so I knew his kids and I knew them. My parents worshipped them. And so everything out of that world is that the gay agenda is out to destroy you and take your soul and make you all gay and probably satanic. And, and so I had never met anyone who was gay, openly gay. I had friends that came out later, but at UC San Diego, I sat down at a table with a group of gay students by accident and started talking to them. And when I found out they're all gay, my mind just exploded. It was like, but these are nice people. They're not trying to convince me of or it's like, this is so embarrassing to admit, but that's where I was at 18. And so once you sort of deprogram from that sort of really rigid thinking, I don't know, it's not a slippery slope, but for me it was a long slope of, wow, that doesn't make sense and that's not true. And so my wife and I moved up to San Francisco to go to grad school. We got married when we were up there, and we tried to find churches and we tried to find, things because we're Christians, so we'll just find a church that believes all the things we do, that gay people are not evil. And women do have a role to play in leadership. We visited like a Calvary Chapel-like church in San Francisco once, and as soon as the head pastor said something like, "Will the men come forward with the offering plates?" my wife just stood up and marched out. And I was like, "Oh, I guess we're leaving." Good Japanese boy did not want to disrupt the service and be the only ones walking out, but I followed her out. I was like, "Yep, we aren't going here." Worship sucked anyway, and sneakers were not cool. Sorry, this is before sneakers, but so yeah. So by the time I got to APU, I lived in San Francisco, and none of my friends were Christian from my grad school, my writing program, and none of my wife's friends in dental school were Christian. But we loved them, and they loved us, and we found, because when you grow up in the church, you're told that it's only through Christ that you can have meaning and goodness and grace and all these things, and you find that's bullshit. There's so much love and grace and community outside of the church, and that's the big lie that they tell you. And so I already knew this when I started at APU. I was already starting to be a part of an amazing community here in LA called the Tuesday Night Cafe, which is an Asian American art space. And those people were becoming my family and my support and my church, if you will. So it was really easy for me to leave church. I read online and on Twitter and on Facebook about all these people that just sort of wake up one morning and realize they're not Christian anymore. And that has to be horribly terrifying your whole life is tied up in these communities and in church. You may work for the church. What the hell do you do then? My heart goes out to them because I took a nice, easy road out of the whole thing that spanned, 15, 20 years. So by the time I realized that APU, and to your question, did APU push me out? No, but they might have accelerated it because, man, those people were horrible. Most of the students were, I figured out how to get along with them and even have relationships with most of them. But man, it was work. It was so much work. So by the time, it was actually a huge relief to just admit one day, I don't believe in this anymore. I read that Bart Ehrman book that kind of was like the last straw.
Yeah.
If the Bible isn't reliable, then what the hell are we even doing this for? To me, I have a lot of friends who still see the world as I do and are Christian. But for me, it was just pretty easy to just sort of slide on out over 15 years. Yeah. I have a blog post where I realized all the different versions of God were me. When I was a kid, God hated gay people and he wanted all these things. And then, I got to college. Oh no, God doesn't hate gay people. That's amazing. There was like 7 or 8 gods throughout my life as a Christian. And I realized it was like that movie, A Beautiful Mind. I'm not sure if you're aware of that.
Yeah, I definitely have seen it. Yeah.
Yeah. So at the end of the movie, there's all his people in his imagination. Sorry, spoiler. It's an old movie.
By now, the statute.
If you haven't seen it now, that's on you.
Yeah.
He won an Academy Award, I think. At the end of the movie, he looks across the street and like all the figments of his imagination are just sort of walking there, smiling at him because he's got them under control now. And I compare that to how, every once in a while I look across the street and see all the different gods I used to believe in. And I was convinced that this is what God thinks. But really it was just what I thought. Yeah. And then we fashioned the God that we believe in to that belief system or worldview. And you realize, man, after like the 5th or 6th time changing, wow, God's either really wishy-washy or there is a correlation here between my development as a human being and my understanding of this concept of God. And so...
Which is also fascinating because you see that even in the pages of the Bible, which, going in, not going into all the history about how all of those books were compiled and decided that they were going to be the Bible, but...
It was the Holy Spirit and God.
The canon,
He told everyone what was going to be in it. It was a really simple process. There's no disputes. This was, decided. The Holy Spirit whispered in their ear what to say. They penned it down and they picked it out. God chose it.
That's what most evangelicals seem to believe.
Right.
This book came down from the heavens. This is the book. Follow this.
You don't even really learn how this canon got put. Like, it took me so long to understand that this canon is still not even agreed on by Christians.
Right.
I might have heard the Catholics had a few extra books and the Catholics, them. Yeah. But then it was like, oh wait, the Orthodox, the Armenian, the Ethiopian, how many different canons? How many different canons exist to this book, and how was this put? And then who put this together? And anyway, these are questions.
And who translated it? Yeah. From which codex?
Exactly.
Yes. These are questions that evangelicals, if they start to go too far into it, it would start to take apart that doctrine of inerrancy, which seems to be the tool they whack everyone with when they say, this isn't my opinion, this is God's opinion.
Which version
clear in the Bible.
Yeah. They cherry pick out a verse and it's like, see? Fling that at you.
And which translation and which passage and which book in the Bible. So to your point, one thing that I think is quite noticeable, but we've been so inundated with the evangelical explanations of why this is the case that we don't actually just sit and think through. God looks very different in this book than he does in this book. He functions very differently in Genesis 1 versus Genesis 2. He functions very differently.
Job.
Yeah, in Job. He functions very differently in Job than he does in,
kind of petty.
Yeah. And then you have, he's very petty throughout a lot of the Old Testament, which, I'm not, I don't want to presume upon any Jewish interpretations.
Evangelicals have been given certain interpretations of the Old Testament that are not very charitable as a whole.
Yeah, and what I want to kind of make clear is that I'm not privy to how Jews read the Bible and how they perceive God in the pages of their scriptures. But that is, I know based on my very limited interactions with a few rather progressive rabbis in my area geographically, that by and large, Jews do not see God in any way, shape, or form, similarly to how evangelical Christians view God. And yet evangelicals tend to believe that they have the final image or authority or idea of what God looks like. And yet, as we were just saying earlier, very few of them have any, working knowledge of their own scriptures.
Right.
So
God kind of looks like Ted Nugent. If he was like a little, no, yeah, he's old now. So
yeah. Oh God. So I actually wanted to ask a bit about your because you've alluded to your perception of queer people and how that evolved, but I find, and we've had this conversation on a couple of episodes on our podcast, because of the perception of queer folks from the evangelical world. How did you reconcile the perception that you had with what was likely, or did APU just not say anything? And were you one like many of us who might be more sympathetic to the LGBTQ community, yet still attending evangelical churches, might just say, "Oh, no! See, our church welcomes everybody. See, we have a big welcome home sign, and we say we want diversity, but we're not actually, diving into policies and stances that the church would take." Was that sort of a sticking point for you, or was that something that kind of evolved over time while you were working at APU?
Yeah, by the time I got to APU, I was pretty much there as far as completely affirming it almost being a non-issue. Because when churches say they're welcoming, it's kind of a bait and switch, because they're not necessarily affirming when they say they're welcoming. Right. Like APU would say, we love everyone and we love gay people. But that means they're going to invite that student or faculty person into a conversation about the legitimacy of their identity. And even if they don't have it all figured out, just the fact that you're going to force someone to defend their existence, to me, is inhumane and unjust. And so for me, that's a non-starter. By then I could never even think of attending a church that was that way. We ended up at an Episcopalian church around that time, which they call the last stop of conservative faith. It was fully affirming. Some of the priests were LGBTQ. And I found that was a really nice way to wrap up my time of faith, to be sitting in pews with gay families and a little bit of diversity. It was still mostly white, but these are good people. These are I called it the NPR church. It's if someone had a book on Terry Gross's show, they were probably speaking in the rectory that weekend at this church. It's very progressive and very intellectual. I decided I liked my Sundays to not be in church more than I liked being in that church, so we stopped going. But as to the queer issue, in the very last episode of my podcast, I talk about this. I was trying to play the game. I was trying not to get in trouble. So I would try to give hints that I was affirming to my students.
Okay.
Because I just knew statistically, if I had, 100 students over the course of a semester, just statistically, some of them were gay.
Oh, yeah.
And so I just wanted to sort of like put the flag out there that I was like, we can talk about this. I value you as a human being, and that would get me in trouble. And so by the halfway through my time there, I was just like, fuck it. Let's just talk about this. And here's what I think. And here's the theology of Christianity that is affirming. There was that great documentary, For the Bible Tells Me So. I don't know if it's
I haven't
still out
I don't
there.
think I have seen that one yet.
Yeah, it's great. It's an amazingly good starting point for a conversation of people who are still in church. And I would show clips of that because these are actual theologians, talking about the clobber verses. So, I also knew when the students started a gay straight alliance, they called it at first. It became a group called Haven, which kind of gained national attention eventually. I knew when the students were telling me they were going to do this, it was going to force me to make an active choice. Was I going to still stay in my own, straight closet and play it safe? Or was I really going to do the right thing and be openly supportive of my students, my queer students? And so I chose the latter, and the last 5 years was just in constant trouble from the activities of the group that was secret. We could have all been kicked out for being in this group. Then the group decided they wanted to come out to the school and be a real student org. And I tried to tell them not to, because they were all going to get in trouble, and a lot of them did. But that really put me in the spotlight. There's a file on me with the board of trustees as the bad queer affirming professor. So it ended up being my the reason that I was booted out. But real quick, to me it was justice, because I don't know if you guys followed the whole Joshua Harris thing. He's now deconstructed, or he's
right.
But everyone's still mad at him, and rightly so. But I was like, I was an evangelical, and I said terrible shit to people in the name of Jesus, in the name of love. And I tell a story in one of my blog posts about how I was in InterVarsity Christian Fellowship at UC San Diego, and one of my fellow leaders in InterVarsity asked if she could meet with me, and she came out to me, which should have been an honorable thing. And I said terrible things to her based on what I understood. I just told her, you should pray. I didn't accept that news as wonderful news that she figured this out about herself. I was trying to bring her back into the safe, evangelical mindset. And I knew as soon as I was saying it by her face that I was fucking up. I was, I don't think I ever spoke to her. I don't think she ever spoke to me again. And the image of her face sort of falling as I said those things, which from my view was in love, I thought I was trying to help her to not be gay, haunted me throughout my adult life, and kind of motivated me to, even at that early stage, at least we should be loving, and we should at least be supportive of people's identities. And so when it came time and the dean was yelling at me and trying to fire me, and I'm yelling back at him, I had a moment where it was just like, yeah, this is right. This is okay, because, this is my penance. I fought the good fight. I thought I was going to stay longer and maybe have a career there and just be that guy advocating. But really, this is the time's up. So I quit.
We live in an era of unprecedented access to information, news, and media. But what happens when all that information leads you to suddenly realize you spent the majority of your childhood in a cult? Well, we can tell you. Join me, Jessica Goforth, and Kathleen Reynolds as we take you into the world of cult recovery after all the emotional, psychological, financial, and sexual abuse we experienced as part of Bill Gothard's Advanced Training Institute. On our podcast called Leaving the Village, we talk candidly about our journey out and interview other survivors whose experiences will boggle your mind as scandals continue to rock the twisted world of IBLP. Subscribe to Leaving the Village today so you don't miss a single episode.
Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying this episode. I want to take a quick break from the conversation to let you know that we have a fantastic new way for you to support the podcast. If you like what you hear from our show and want to partner with us, head over to patreon.com/fullmutuality to donate. As a partner, you'll get exclusive content, access to occasional live recording events, and more for as little as $5 a month. Thank you already for your support of what we're creating, and now, back to the conversation. I find that that story, incredibly relatable. I don't have any specific in instances in my mind where something like that has come up, and I think part of it might have to do with how much I had towed the line while I was in the evangelical world, and even in my more compassionate days, there were people that were sharing with me that their beliefs were shifting, but not very far. I was working for a very staunchly Calvinist church while holding to Wesleyan ideas and being kind of vocally anti-Calvinist. And so there were some people in our Calvinist church, which wasn't branded as a Calvinist church. They liked to say, no, we're just Christian. And so when you start to question Calvinism, you think you're questioning Christianity. But I think, some people were coming to me and expressing that they too, felt this discomfort. And so those are the only times that I can think of specifically of anybody confiding in me that they didn't fit the standard of the environment that we were in. But I think one of the things that sort of hit me, and you mentioned Joshua Harris and why people are still upset with him. Janice, who had been on our podcast recently, I love the way that she addressed it, in that, you know what, you're the audience that you have harmed, they don't want to hear from you anymore. And
right.
And to any thinking person, it might be best to move on, to let your apology sit out there and just say, you know what, I'm never going to reach that person or that set of people. But, when it comes to somebody like Josh Harris, who had his teachings and his book and the things, and not just in that world, but even as a pastor and what he did while he was a pastor in Sovereign Grace Ministries, everything that he had been peddling was being peddled by other problematic pastors. And so I guess, as Janice put it, perhaps his way of making penance of divine justice, if you believe in such a thing, might be for him to, instead of trying to address the people that he's hurt and trying to sell them his new deconstruction curriculum or whatever,
Right. 300 and something bucks, yeah.
maybe he should be talking to the pastors and trying to convince them that what he had sold was toxic, and here's why, and here's what you need to do with your congregation to make things right.
Right.
So that's just a thought, but I kind of wonder if some of us are in that boat, because and Gail has a few friends and I have one or two who probably see ourselves in Joshua Harris's shoes, because, well, he deconstructed. He was somebody who was very who bought into all of this at a young age, and then now he's out of it, and that's who we are, right? Where there's that relatability there. And we've said some pretty fucked up shit to people, right? We've done things that we're not proud of, right? But none of us have done things that we're not proud of that have affected millions and millions and millions of people directly.
Yeah, we're kind of all lucky that when we were at our worst, we didn't have that kind of platform he did, and I do have a lot of sympathy for him on that level. But I do agree. I think there's a direction he could take that would be a lot more helpful, probably to the general community and people he could be calling out too that put him in those positions, who were his buddies and friends who shared power, gave him the power that he had, that he should be speaking up instead of speaking down, in comedy, punching up versus punching down, right? Like using that influence you have to hit and target the right people that it applies to. I'm trying to think. I had questions as you were talking that were just floating through my head, and
I went all over the place.
No, we're like that all the time.
Yeah, we both have ADHD, so we're always all over the place.
We're like, people listen to us. That's incredible, because I'm pretty sure most of our audience probably has some form of ADHD or close, because they can follow us. They can get our rabbit holes. I know where I was going to go. I think when you were talking about awful people, and that caught my attention, you had to deal with a lot of terrible people. I want to know what was explain about the terrible people. Explain how that was terrible. And I think, it's probably helpful for a lot of our white audience who, we say terrible things and do terrible things and are totally like Nate will tell me sometimes things that happen, and I'm like, oh, white people so think this way, and like kind of just recognizing like, yes, these are deep-seated ways that we handle life and treat people around us without even an awareness that that's happening. I don't know if that was a direction of the terrible people or if it was other directions of terrible people, but I want to hear about the terrible people.
So yeah, there's a whiteness element to it, but I want to make clear, I'm not saying white people are inherently this way. I just think any majority culture that is in power has the responsibility to deal with their privilege and their perspective that tends to override all the perspectives and experiences of the people below them. So yeah, it was mostly white men that just really have no internal mechanism to question anything they say. Everything they say is perfect. You can't push back. So if they say something racist, and there were a lot of stories that I have of students encountering professors just promoting really racist things, which by itself is fine, but most educational systems have policies and procedures in place to handle this and correct, but you don't have that in evangelical spaces. So I'm thinking of like Dan Hodges' episode of my podcast where he tells all these horrible stories of things students said and things his colleagues said to him, which are terrible. But it's not that those things were said that is so terrible, because that's life. We as people of color just are used to it. It's the fact that there's no correction. There's nothing in place that's going to address it and value the experience and honor that hurt or that power dynamic that exists. And so I know I'm being really vague right now, but that is the overall problem. It's not that people say things or that do things. It's that those things are supported. So
like you have a student that says something really racist and terrible, and you guys as staff are expected to just suck it up and move on, and there's no hope of going to any admin and expecting them to handle or deal with.
Yeah, well, if the student said something like that in my class, it gets handled. I'll handle it. Like I don't want anyone in my class feeling like a racist view is condoned or supported. I just wrote a chapter in my book where a kid said out loud that all Mexican people are lazy, and he was going to write a paper on it. And I was like, you can't write a paper about that, because A, it's just not academically sound, and B, that's really racist and terrible. What a terrible thing. And I had two students at the back of the room who were Latina, and so I knew from experience, and I just knew I had to have their back, and I had to make them feel safe. And so I destroyed that kid. And we actually became good friends. I became friends with that kid. But I did it in a way that allowed him to come back from it. But I made absolutely sure that everyone understood what was wrong with what he said, the context in which he said it. Because when a kid says something like that, it's fine. You got that kid, but then you look around the room and there's all these other white kids nodding their heads like, yeah, that. And so you're not just dealing with the one kid. So, yeah, if that gets said in another class from another professor, the professor might even say something like, well, that's an interesting observation, and let's talk about that. That's usually what happened at places like APU. And so that leaves the marginalized kids feeling completely vulnerable and completely otherized. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, like, if you want examples, I don't know, there's so many.
So you had, on your podcast, you had at least one, possibly two, the way that the stories were told were a little vague because I think you might have remembered it the first time you alluded to it, and it got
the swastikas.
Yes, there were from what I gathered and how I'm putting it together, there were multiple swastika stories at APU or incidents. Is that correct? Am I?
Apparently so. When Obama got elected in 2008, this is when this all went down.
Okay.
It really just emboldened the students and faculty, for that matter, to just be anti-black. Well, you got a black president, so I'm just going to let it all fly. And so horribly racist anti-black things were said all over campus. And I'm talking top down, administration all the way down to the students, staff. And it was really awful. It was really, it kind of broke me. It was like, it was the first time maybe the second or third time or fifth or 10th time that I was like, I can't stay here.
Yeah.
I probably had that moment every year, actually, when I think about it. But it was one of those moments. And I told this story in a couple other podcasts, but when Obama got elected, the next morning I had a class, and this is around the time of like flip phones, so texting was kind of new. But there are all these text threads going around the dorms, and these are all freshmen. And I could see my students come and sit in the class, and they were all looking at their phones and laughing and showing each other, and they were like forwarding it. And I was like, "Whoa, what do you guys?" Because they were depressed. They thought that Satan had become president of the United States. One of the kids read the text out to me, and it said, "Be sure to get your Obama Christmas ornaments so you can hang the N-word from the tree."
Jesus Christ.
I asked them how many of them had received this text. I didn't ask who sent it, but almost all of them raised their hand and said it's going all around the dorms. It's not that racism happens, because it happens everywhere. Yeah. It's that it's welcomed. It's accepted. Someone may go, "Oh, that's terrible. You shouldn't say that." But the person who says something like that doesn't lose any social credibility or does not lose any standing in the community. It's like, "Oh, that's terrible. Ha ha ha." So you can be overtly racist and still be a leader. You can still be an important person in this culture. And that's the part that I really was fighting against, alongside many of the students that I had and many of the other faculty. But we were not the majority. We were a small minority of people on campus pushing back at this sort of culture.
I mean, I'm going to assume that being one of the small minority of BIPOC teachers, and here you have situations that will go down in your classroom, I'm assuming, where you've heard it right in front of your, like, this situation with like running to write an essay and you having to correct the student. But then I'm assuming that probably kids that were sitting in white professors' classes where racism was being spewed by these teachers, these white teachers, you have students running probably to you because they need someone who's not white who they can confide in. So you're not just dealing with processing what might have gone down in your own class. But I'm just going to take a wild guess that you're probably having to listen to a lot of stories from from all the minority students that are sitting in other classes and experiencing these kind of comments and racism in their from staff, from other students. Did you find that was like a heavy load, or that was something very common where you had other kids coming to you and telling you stories that weren't even nothing to do with your class, but yet you're bearing that load because you're in the minority of teachers and faculty?
Yeah, definitely. There was an office called the Multi-Ethnic Programs Office, which was sort of like the haven on campus. You could go in there and just take a breath. And we didn't necessarily just tell all the stories. We just knew we were hearing it. And the director of the Multi-Ethnic Programs, who took over kind of at the height of my time, was Black, and he was totally down with the students. The students loved him. He ended up passing away I think right before 2009 school year. And that was a huge blow because there weren't many places students could go to just share their story and have people feel that with them. Because I think that's why community is so important, is that it's one thing to go through it, but if you don't have the community to support you, you feel like you're all alone, and the whole world is against you, or just doesn't value you enough to see your humanity. So yes, but there were a lot of white professors, not a lot, but there were white professors who were also known to be people that students could talk to about these things. And in fact, not all the BIPOC professors were safe people to talk to.
That was my second
promoting
question.
white supremacy themselves.
Yeah, I had some questions jotted down to you, which was along the lines of how did APU, and this ties into I think what you're about to say, but how did APU try and make it look like a diverse, like optically diverse where you were, while at the same time trying to silence American BIPOC population from pushing back against conservative white supremacist views? How did the university try and trick the system, I guess? And if that ties into what you were saying, where it wasn't all BIPOC teachers that were necessarily allies, how that play out in your time?
Yeah, because to be successful as a BIPOC person at a place like APU, and it's not just APU, I hear the same thing from all the evangelical schools. You have to be, an ally of whiteness. You can't stand up for yourself in moments of crisis like that. So I was very visible. I was the only faculty working directly with multi-ethnic programs. None of the other faculty wanted to. And yet I never got recognized by the administration for that. The people who got recognized were the ones who would promote more of the school values. So you had to play this game, and then they would rely heavily on. Well, there's two things: the student population. The undergrads were always completely white. When they got below 80% near the end of the time I was there, they had a big celebration. Yay, we're 79% white instead of in the 80s. Wow. But if you look at their stats that they put out, they included grad programs, and the grad programs took heavily from international students. There were a lot of Korean and African people from African countries, South American countries, Hawaii, which is an islander population. And so the students who came to APU, especially the grad students, were already very conservative. They were very down with the vibe of APU. They worshipped the vibe of APU, a lot of them. And so you can say, wow, the grad programs are 50% students of color. I don't remember what it was, but it was somewhere around the middle. But that doesn't mean that African American students were well represented, or Chicano students from LA were these were not people who were pushing progressive values for their communities. These were people who came to try and assimilate to a whiteness. And the same thing happened in the faculty as well. There were a lot of international faculty. So probably, I'm guessing, third to half of the Asian professors were not American. And that's fine. And I'm not saying anything against international people, but you get a different kind of professor if they don't understand the history and the context of racism
in America specifically, right? For Asian Americans, for Black Americans, for African Americans, it's a completely different context of the history of them. The perspective you will have will be completely different.
Yeah. And so that's sort of how they sort of not cheated, but just gamed the system of diversity. Because, all evangelicals are smart enough to say, oh, we value diversity. It's in their mission statements usually. But what that usually means is, it's a white space where other people are welcome to try and fit in. And it's about as good as they can do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's probably something common, not just to the university that you were a part of, but I'm guessing it's something that they do in a lot of Christian universities is they, cherry pick or pick out people who will agree with their values or not push back if they're coming from the outside, kind of, it's not their culture. And so they're going to probably be much more submissive to whatever is being told as the narrative.
Because they want to cause trouble. They're in a strange land. I used to go to the Christianity and Literature Conference, which is like it's a thing. And there may be, 300 people attend these things. And there were maybe like 10 or 12 BIPOC professors at these things. And we would sort of sit together and sort of compare notes. Like, how bad is it where you teach? Oh, yeah, that's pretty bad. How bad is it? Oh, yeah. And so it's kind of a thing. It's just, yeah.
Yeah. Just something that's understood.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. So before we kind of wrap up, I did want to give you the opportunity to kind of, I guess, share, stuff that you're working on, as far as like links and your website and social media, all of that fun stuff, and just kind of do a little commercial for you and your work.
I want to know about the book too.
Yeah.
The inspiration, and I sort of do want to know too, has the podcast, and you can get to all your social media and your book too, but like, has doing the podcast, has that been a healing experience for you? What has it been like on your journey of just letting students tell their story and how you envision this to be? And is it sort of, has it surprised you? And what has that journey been like too?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you're asking a Japanese American to promote himself. That's hard, but I'll do my best.
That's why I did it. Yes. Come on.
Okay. Okay. Deep breath. This is okay. I'm going to get through this. Yes, the podcast has been an amazing experience. I was just trying to. There's so many stories, and it was not going to fit in my book to tell all these stories, and so I wanted an outlet for all these students and friends who taught there or were administrators there to tell their stories. And so I figured it would be a good way to sort of develop a platform because when you write a book these days, they want you to have, a platform. You can't just write a book.
Right.
So it was satisfying with the things, publishers wanted and I wanted to do this. This is something I wanted to do. And by the time I did 3 interviews, I was like, this is incredible. Like, these people are just they haven't thought about this in a long time. They went through this, didn't really think about it, just moved on. And now I'm dragging them back through all this trauma. And, all of the people I've interviewed have said that it helped them find some kind of closure, or at least beginning of closure from the experience, and recognize that was traumatic, because we were when you're in it, you just put your head down and figure out what you have to do to survive and to have some kind of agency and identity in this experience.
Yeah.
And then when you look back, you go like, what the fuck was that? That was terrible. I noticed when I was telling my new community friends the stories, they would just be amazed at how, no, that couldn't have happened. So yes, it's been really healing.
I have just barely scratched the surface of all.
You don't even know,
wacky things that went on.
So yes, the podcast has turned into this huge healing factor in my own life. I'm way deconstructed, and yet I have to confess, most of the episodes I've edited, I've been crying while I was editing because just imagining these people going through these experiences, and I was there for a lot of it. I saw a lot of these things happen firsthand, and yet hearing them put it together and connect it to how it informs their worldview now and their identity now, to me is an amazing thing. And so especially the Asian one, I think it's the 4th episode with Sammy. I was adding some music and doing some final edits, and my wife walked in, and I'm sitting there bawling, and she was like, "Isn't this what you were working on last week?" And I was like, "Yeah, but
editing takes a long time."
Yeah. I cried every time. It was just like, oh man.
Yeah.
And in every episode there's a moment where I'm just like when you feel the weight of it all. So yeah, it's been great. So the book is sort of a companion to this. It's my story of deconstruction while teaching at an evangelical college, and trying to sort of do a couple things. Which is, I developed my identity as an Asian American person while I was there. Like, I mean, I knew I was Asian American, I knew I was Japanese American, but it really came into shape while I was there. Probably because it's just such a stark contrast. It's just my face and my perspective. In a space like that, you can't not see yourself. I don't fit here. I don't think this way. And so it's a tribute to my friends in my community who really made deconstructing not easy, but definitely a lot more fun and interesting. So the book, was coming out through Lake Drive Books, hopefully in January. And I'll be picking up the second. I had to stop. I had at least 5 more episodes in season 1, but I signed the book contract and I had to have this deadline. So I was like, oh shit, I have to write a book. So
hunker down.
because it was all consuming. I would listen to it so many. You guys do this, right? You listen to it and re-listen to it and I was trying to find an angle of a story to tell, and I do original music in it, and I was just trying to make it. I just feel like when you're Japanese American, you can't just make a podcast. I had to
be excellent.
Yeah, I had to go above and beyond what the expectations are. If anyone's going to listen to this, so it just so happens that it struck a chord and people have been reaching out. So the second season is going to have people from other schools. Cool. So maybe Nate can come on and talk about.
Oh, I would love to. We could talk about Bob Jones.
Yeah, I'm so curious because I feel like it's funny. I went into this like, well, you wait till the world hears these stories, and then people started hitting me up on Twitter and Instagram like, well, I have this story. I'm like, oh shit, that's like way past what the stories I'm telling.
Yeah. So I realize we've been talking about your podcast. We've mentioned the podcast. I don't think we mentioned the title of the podcast.
It's a secret title. No one can know. It's called Chapel Probation, which is one of those. I had a group on Facebook when I was first starting. I was like, what should we call this? And all my friends and former students had ideas. And this one kid, BJ, who's the second guest on the podcast, came up with that. And I was like, that's kind of perfect because if you went to evangelical college, you know exactly what that is. And if you didn't, you're like, what the hell is Chapel Probation?
I'm in a little chat group. I don't know if I should be putting them on blast, but I'm going to do it anyway. Of BJU alums who and some former faculty who the thing that stands out for us is discipline committee. We all stood in that line for the discipline committee, so we called our little chat group the discipline committee.
Sounds like Chapel Probation to me.
Yep.
Wait, you stood in that line, Nate?
Oh, multiple times.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I got to salute. I got to shout you out. Salute you, not the model minority.
Definitely not. He even has a hoodie that goes with that.
I do.
Not the model minority.
I have a hoodie. It says not your model minority. I feel like if I were alive during World War II, I would be one of those ones standing there holding the sign saying "I am American."
Yeah. Or a no boy.
Yeah.
On the topic of being Japanese American, I had to ask you this before we close off. But like, do you have a favorite Japanese whiskey that you like? Because I know Nate is a big whiskey drinker.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, I talk a big game when it comes to drinking because I drank a little in my 20s and 30s. And when I got to 40, I get the glow. So I don't, and I'm 52 now. So as I get the glow now, it just feels like I'm dying. So I don't drink a lot. But so when I do drink, I want it to be good. So yeah, I love Japanese whiskey. We like Hibiki and Iwai.
Oh yes, yes.
Iwai, yeah. The Japanese Harmony is probably among my favorites. But I don't get it often because it is pretty expensive.
The Hibiki Harmony.
Yep.
That's Nate's one of his favorite yeah. Do you have any favorite restaurants out by your good Japanese American restaurants?
On the West Coast, of course, he's got good Japanese restaurants.
Because Nate is such a foodie and he loves finding out new places to eat. So if he was to come out to your area, to LA, you live near LA still, or?
Yeah. I'm in Pasadena. So I'm so lucky to live here because there's an Italian market up the street. I buy stuff to cook. There's an Indian market down the street. I got H Mart and all the Japanese markets. 3 different Mexican markets. So like I can always, and I cook. So I cook a lot. So yeah, but also there's every kind of food in the world. In a 5-minute drive from me. So spoiled in that way. So yeah, come on out. Both you guys.
Oh man!
Open invitation to LA.
Fantastic.
On a food tour. I'm actually going. I'm taking Joe Lumen to a famous Filipino barbecue place here in LA called the Park's Finest. I got to shout out the Park's Finest. It's a great story about this family in this community that avoided the violence of Echo Park by learning barbecue and putting on parties, and now they have this restaurant. They were on Diners, Drive-ins, and Dives, and they're just killing it with this amazing food.
That's so cool. Wow. I'm biracially Japanese and Filipino. So the Filipino food is another thing.
I have to take you to this place.
We'll totally take you up on that if we go down to LA. Yeah.
Love it. Okay. Well, I know we could go on ad nauseum, but I think
we're just getting started.
Exactly. The listeners will probably be tuning out soon. So real quick, where can people find you? Do you have social media handles? Do you have a website? What's the scoop? And of course, it's all going to go in the show notes, but for people who don't check show notes. Yeah.
Our ScottOkamoto.com is the sort of the mothership website. And on Twitter and Instagram, RS Okamoto.
Okay.
Yeah, and the Chapel Program podcast is available at all the places.
Awesome.
So please check it out.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks so much. We'll put everything in the show notes. So if you're listening and you want to actually click on a link, just hit up the show notes and all of the lovely info will be there. So Scott, thank you again for joining us. This has been such a great conversation.
Thank you. Yeah. It's an honor to be on your show. I'm a big fan. So this is very cool.
Thanks. That wraps up another episode of the Full Mutuality Podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. And if you don't already have one, head over to our website, fullmutuality.com, for a list of all the apps you can find us on.
We couldn't do this without you, our listeners, so thank you so much for your continued support. Speaking of support, one of the best things you can do for us is to head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a review.
I'm pretty sure 5-star reviews get you an extra crown in heaven.
But seriously, if you found this episode insightful, spread the word and share it with your friends.
And don't forget to follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Full Mutuality. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Full Mutuality Podcast.